The issues start from its inception. The rail program has been marred by corruption, and many government works projects are prone to corruption, but this is one of the larger ones to have come under investigation. So the scandals they were facing were bound to be bigger and more brazen as well. This proved a bit of a problem for them because it meant that they could no longer tout how amazing their new project is without being overshadowed by scandals. These issues were compounded in 2011 by a crash between two high-speed trains which collided on a section of track that was 20 meters off the ground. The managing failures in this incident, which caused the accident, were later unveiled. The public lost faith in China's high-speed rail system because of these two massive accidents, which has set the country back hundreds of billions of dollars and reopened discussion about corruption within the ranks. The government's solution to this was to semi-privatize the railways by selling them to a state-owned company, China Railway. A year later, the two companies that were producing railcars, CSR and CNR, merged and formed CRC. These were two massive state-owned corporations, which set out on the Buy the Great Firewall was a heavily enforced set of digital regulations that prevented Chinese citizens from freely using the internet. They could also borrow more money because funding came only from corporations and not the government. The result was almost $1 trillion invested in improving Chinese railway systems. And they found this money through a combination of state-owned banks, public-issued bonds and investments from local governments. The Chinese government has been trying new ways to sustain the economy, and they found this money through a combination of state-owned banks, public-issued bonds, and investments from local governments. Now that China Rail has finished its latest building sprint, the problems started to trickle in. By the time their business lines had been built for the most profitable routes, most of these countries' population centers had already been connected. This all meant that new trains were being built in areas that weren't going to be able to generate the same demand for tickets, as these cities already had sufficient transportation. However, despite this fact, the government still insisted on pushing these projects forwards because of their reliance on public funds. Sam from Windover Productions did a great video on this. The developers of China's high-speed rail network never stopped to ask themselves if there was a better solution to the problem of how to move people around the country. If you look down on every problem from the perspective of your ministry, then every problem will just look like a nail. Likewise, the problems can often start to be solved with the help of faster trains, but that's not always the case. China's high-speed rail system is a big deal and receives a lot of attention. But it shouldn't be seen as the only option. Many people say there are better, more sustainable options. The cost of a train is cheaper than that of a bus because it is cheaper to build. Consequently, tickets for rail travel are also less expensive, which is good for people on a budget who are still not wealthy by Western standards. Another benefit of regular rail is that it can carry cargo, which is why it's a good thing for countries like China with heavy industry. It's also worth noting that China's high-speed railway network has been a big topic of discussion, but in isolation this doesn't seem like enough to justify so many lines across the country. But due to the losses on unprofitable routes, the state-owned company could afford to make a little bit of profit. Their delicate balance stopped. However, the interest payments on the accrued debts have been outpacing the operating profits of the rail lines. A number of factors have been making this worse. The lines are starting to age and are requiring more and more maintenance. Ticket prices for rail lines can't keep increasing, as if we do, people may fly or return to buses. COVID hit, so the demand slowed and almost every line stopped being profitable. China is now dealing with a state-owned enterprise that has $850 billion in debt and can't repay it. It's come at a time where fiscal stimulus like the original high-speed rail development plan from 2008 would be been needed all over again. Obviously, this isn't going to happen in the US anytime soon. And the government has already made it clear that they're not building any more high-speed rail, but that doesn't mean they are free from problems of the existing network. If you try to sell off those connections to private businessmen, you could put them under a lot of debt and make commuting even more. Then any company that wants to maximize profit will only be interested in purchasing the routes making the most money. The government would need to spend taxpayer money on unprofitable routes, which means people needing these services would not have access. One option is to cease all railway work. However, this will result in the closure of hundreds of thousands of job positions and be a major setback for China's economy. Another choice is to do nothing, but there has been resounding opposition to this strategy. The best solution appears to be a bailout, and yeah, I know China. Railway is a state-owned company, but they do have some freedom not afforded to actual government ministries. The options are all less than ideal, and it's tough to decide which would be the best, especially with an impending housing crisis. There's a looming energy crisis and what feels like an ongoing pandemic. I always keep predictions to myself, but I can't seem to see the Chinese agenda moving forward without addressing these issues. At the very least, has to be good for people to see highways and bridges. You should plan and execute your business in your home country. If you stay angry at the red tape, I will too. However, you could take credit for highlighting how useless our own governments are.